Graciela, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us about our social action project today. And I just have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So, Graciela, what made you decide to get into your line of work? And could you please introduce yourself for us and what your line of work is?
Sure. Hi, my name's Graciela, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. Um, I, from very early on in life, knew that I wanted to do stuff to help people, and so initially I had thought I was wanted to be a pediatrician. Probably could have stuck it through, but anyway, chemistry and physics did me in, so
That's very
we
fair.
switched over. And truthfully, I couldn't tell you the exact moment that I knew I was going to be a social worker. I did a few months of prevention care work, foster care prevention work. And then I also did adoption, social, the kids were cleared to be adopted and they were being placed in foster care. And so just maintaining a roster of that. I wouldn't say I had a sheltered life, but when I saw what I saw, then I definitely thought I had a sheltered life, and then progressed to eventually coming to where I am now, where I am a clinical social worker providing mental health therapy in a school-based program. Um, so I've kind of run a gamut of a lot of different type of work within my field.
We spoke with Graciela about her direct perspective as a professional as it relates to migration justice in the context of education systems. To provide context, there's been a demographic transformation in recent years. Nearly 20% of K 12 students are immigrants or children of immigrants. Immigrant origin students comprise about 32% of U.S. higher education enrollment. 22% of students are English learners, requiring targeted instructional support. And immigrant origin students account for over 90% of post secondary enrollment growth since the year 2000. Equity challenges such as disproportionate representation in low income households and persistent gaps in academic achievement linked to language access and resources do exist. The implications for social action are that this information means that there's a necessity for equitable funding, inclusive curricula, and language support services. This is central to advancing educational equity and workforce development. So, how do you specifically, or how does your team specifically make your school a welcoming environment for either international or migrant students?
I just don't know that it's quite gotten to the place where it needs to be. The area itself is very wealthy and fairly homogenous, but there is a growing population, and I think that it's going to have to be looked in more in depth as numbers grow, in terms of students. So right now, is it the best? No, I definitely don't think it's the best. Is it horrendous? Not no either, but the onus is pretty much on the students if there is difficulties like of understanding, cultural understanding, and more so than cultural, socioeconomic, I think is the issue here.
Sure. So, yeah, and leading right into the next question I was going to ask you, which is what barriers do you kind of see immigrant students facing? You're mentioning language barriers, you're mentioning socioeconomic barriers. So, could you expand on that a little bit?
Language only in the sense of parents. The students obviously are going to have to speak the language to be in, middle schools or whatever. I think the ability to communicate and relate directly with parents is sometimes limited based on language. I find it difficult to understand. Like, there's obviously access to language line, etc. Even for myself, I have a client whose mother speaks Portuguese. I can't speak Portuguese, so I have to use a language line. However, I can understand some of the wording and and so I will be able to at least relate a little bit more than someone who speaks no Spanish, no Portuguese, no,
Yeah.
Um, so there's some of that. So language line is great, but it also creates a third dynamic within the therapeutic relationship. And so it stilts your conversation and it stilts how you progress and it stilts how you relate because you're speaking to a third person and relying that they are translating appropriately. But even just levels of embarrassment, I think of parents. Like I do have this one mother who will go into a meeting and will handle everything in English, and then later on has only captured about a fourth of what has been said, you know. And so just knowing that, I've been, you know, as I've developed a relationship, I've just gone into the school and be like, please do not do anything without language line or an interpreter in there for her, because as
Yes.
much as she says she understands, she truly doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And another potential issue with language lines sometimes is that, culturally, sometimes there are no direct translations from what somebody's saying, or you don't pick up the implication, kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah,
No, for sure. Or
kind of.
even sometimes the intonations.
Right.
South America can tend to be a slightly more effusive and exaggerated type of speak. And, you know, you might say something that sounds really bad translated, but that's not what is being
And
said, you
yeah,
know?
that's not what you intended, right? Yeah. So it sounds like that could the language line is an asset, but it sounds like it can also continue to kind of put up barriers. Um, since we're talking
Ideally,
about
like if I had, yeah, if I had a magic wand, then you would seek out bilingual trained clinicians to be present in the school. Um, that would be my ideal. Is it perfect? Not necessarily, because there's still going to be differences in terms of countries or whatever, but it's so much easier. Um, you know, and I was actually thinking about that before you logged on. I was like, well, what stops people from hiring it? Well, one, it's the need it's an assessment that you have a need. But then I was thinking about what areas immigrant children who have educational opportunities go to study, and it isn't necessarily social work, it isn't necessarily mental health. um, and so I think that it's a growing field, and I think that it will be something that will be more easily accessible. But even when I was in school, if you talked about my friends when we graduated, it was very professional type of job, you know, doctors, lawyers, this, you know, stuff that was going to then contribute to the family significantly versus, hi, I'm here not to get paid, you know.
so we just spoke on, how hiring bilingual, workers in the school, maybe not particularly social workers, but any bilingual staff would be very helpful to students and other staff and community members. So, can you elaborate on anything else that you see as kind of,
But it's more so than bilingual. I also want to say like almost bicultural,
yes,
because there's definitely plenty of staff who can speak some Spanish, you know, but it's just the experience that they've had, you know. It's also being able to pronounce words correctly. And so I think that that's part of it more so than just the language.
yeah. Linguistic diversity is a major and growing factor in U.S. schools, and it's critical for educators to understand its impact. Currently, there are over 5 million English learners, or EL students, in K 12 schools, making up about 10 to 11% of the student population. These students speak more than 400 different languages, reflecting a high level of cultural and linguistic diversity. While Spanish is the most common home language, it's important to recognize that there's still a wide range of linguistic needs represented. Despite making up a significant portion of the student population, access to trained educators and appropriate services for EL students is still inconsistent across schools. At the same time, the EL population has grown steadily, increasing the demand for support services. Academically, language barriers can have a direct impact. Without adequate support, EL students are more likely to struggle with reading and math and may take longer to reach academic proficiency. This is not due to ability, but rather access to language support. There are also important cultural considerations. Differences between home and school environments, such as communication styles, expectations, and norms, can affect student engagement and trust. Schools need to actively work to bridge these gaps. For example, cultural norms around authority, participation, and parent school communication can differ widely. In some cultures, students may be less likely to speak up in class or challenge a teacher, which can sometimes be misinterpreted as disengagement. Similarly, families may show involvement in ways that don't align with typical U.S. school expectations. It's also important to note that about 72% of EL students are actually US born, meaning that they may still navigate complex cultural and linguistic differences despite being raised in the US. Overall, addressing linguistic diversity requires both strong academic supports and culturally responsive practices to ensure equity in education. So yes, bicultural staff being available for these students would be one thing that could move us in a more positive direction.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that you see as being an opportunity for the school to support this population?
Just knowing that they're there and making services accessible without making a big deal out of it, you know. An example was I had a student who was going to take an AP test and was talking about having to pay the AP fees. And I was like, just talk to the assistant principal. They could waive the fees, and that they didn't know that. Whereas in Yonkers, where Leroy, where my supervisor worked, was like they make regular announcements. You know, if you're going to waive APs, you know, like just put it out there. It's nothing that you know needs to be secretive. It's there. It's a resource that all schools have. So therefore, just announce it.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
do you think that because of the particular school system that you work in, because you said that they were kind of affluent, you know, it's an affluent area, um, do you think that there's some erasure, you know, happening?
I wouldn't say erasure, but as much an expectation of you will advocate for yourself, which is particularly difficult in adolescence. But it's also a skill that I think is part of parenting, and sometimes parenting isn't necessarily the strongest suit when you're an only thing that you can your entire life is consumed with I'm going to work so I can provide food and shelter, and so there isn't much left over in terms of energy wise, right? And
Absolutely.
so the entire theory, you know, Maslow's hierarchy is super important to me because if we can remove some of the stressors on the bottom level, then we can start have access to higher levels. And so, you know, like when my kids were younger, I would practice with them. Okay, so let's go talk to the teacher. What do you want to do? What's this? You know, whatever. But this is because one, I had the knowledge, but then two, I also am not worried about, you know, I wasn't worried about, okay, well, we can't talk about that right now because I have to go to work or whatever, you know. So
So it sounds like, you know, there are some barriers that exist in the school that may create struggle for this population, but also I'm hearing that, you know, a lot of it starts at home and a lot of it is kind of family based. And perhaps if the families and not just the students had more support, then we might have better outcomes.
possibly, yeah.
Yeah. So, and in the same vein, kind of, you know, do you ever meet with families, and if so, what are the most common themes that are kind of discussed?
I do meet with families. We always meet for initial assessments. A lot of the concerns, obviously, are going to be school function, school related. Right now, I do have on my caseload a particular family that I do see everybody. I see, you know, the siblings, and then I see the parents. And the issues there are pretty much, I mean, there's mental health issues, severe mental health issues to deal with, but then there is it's just parenting and consistency. And so parent when I say parenting, it's being a parent of an adolescent is it's like getting whiplash left and right every day. You know, there is such a push-pull situation. So there's that dynamic, but then when you have in also dynamics of perhaps past trauma on the parent side, um, you have the expectations that I'm working and I'm providing for you, that should be enough parenting for you versus, you know, this low key, you know, I love you type of more effusive type of thing. But then you also have sometimes expectations of more maturity, because I'm off working, therefore you have to take care of certain things at home that are beyond the scope of the developmental age. That becomes an issue. But I hesitate very much to say that it starts with parents.
Hmm.
I think that if someone, I mean, there are severe cases that are just going to happen with or without type of parenting, you know. I just want to say consistency, parenting. I
Yeah.
mean, but those are my two words that constantly come up. Just like
Yeah.
if you're just consistent in what you say, like say what you mean and mean what you
Yeah.
do.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, and that's pretty universal. That's a pretty universal concept, I think. As Graciela mentions, when discussing migration justice in education, it's essential to consider the role of the family system. Family support strongly influences students' academic performance, behavior, and overall well being. For migrant students, families may be dealing with challenges like language barriers, financial stress, or navigating unfamiliar systems, all of which can impact a student's experience in school. Key factors include parental involvement, which is a major predictor of success, but may look different across cultures or be limited by structural barriers. Home stress and access to resources also play a role, as well as cultural values that shape how families view education and interact with schools. From a systems perspective, ecological systems theory reminds us that students are influenced by interconnected environments family, school, and community, so we need to consider all of these together. For schools, this means building strong, culturally responsive partnerships with families and improving communication and support. This could include translation services or more flexible ways for families to engage. Overall, research shows that family engagement improves academic outcomes across all income levels, making it a key component of educational equity.
So, so are there any standard kind of policies or services just in place?
Particularly in my program, I cover 5 schools, which is unusual. I'm not in one school, so I'm literally bouncing around. So I go in, I go out, I go in. So I don't really have an access to procedure
Right.
necessarily. I just go in, I ask for a room, I see the kid, and I come out.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. So having someone who is a consistent presence, like yourself, in those spaces would be beneficial, is what you're
Mhm.
saying. Yeah.
As mentioned, immigrant students often face frequent school transitions, language barriers, and added family stress as they adjust to new environments. Research shows that having consistent support from a trusted adult, such as a teacher, counselor, or mentor, can significantly improve academic outcomes, engagement, and overall mental health. When students have consistent support, they are more likely to attend school regularly and successfully graduate. This consistency acts as an anchor during times of uncertainty, especially when students are navigating changes in both school systems and cultural expectations. Consistent adults also play a key role in reducing stress. They help with understanding expectations, navigating applications, and adjust to language and cultural differences. This guidance not only benefits students, but can also support families who may be unfamiliar with the education system. Additionally, strong relationships between teachers and students foster a sense of belonging. When students feel seen, supported, and understood, they are more engaged in the classroom and more connected to their school community. This sense of belonging is directly linked to improved attendance, participation, and mental health outcomes.
Would it be possible to share kind of an example of a time when, a partnership with you or a partnership with a school and a student's family or community organization kind of made a meaningful difference in a student's success or didn't?
I think advocating for a student to receive services above and beyond someone else who was referred is an example. The student fit every dynamic that was important for the program in the sense of transportation needs are not accessible and language and economic status and immigration status and so all of those things made it so much more important for this person to be seen within the school system versus trying to locate something outside.
Yeah. So having you available, having
Mhm.
having services available in general made a difference to that student's success because it wouldn't have been accessible to that student otherwise. Yeah. What advice would you give to anyone involved in this kind of work, surrounding changes you see as needing to be made?
The population that we are speaking of
Yes.
is a stressed population. Therefore, whatever we do, let's not add to that stress.
Yeah. So,
That would be my advice. Let's be very clear and also be very open in communication as to the reasons why we do what we do. And if we need to make reports or etc., talk to them and then explain the reasons, but as well understand that every action the system takes creates a reaction in the home. And so let's be very clear as to the purpose as to why we're doing this. Are we covering our assets, as what a detective I used to work with who would say, are we covering our assets or or is there a real potential or need or danger, and therefore we must do this.
Yeah. A very high level of transparency
Mhm.
with who you're working with and with your, with staff, with colleagues, with everyone. Yeah, and making sure that we are really in touch with the purpose of the work.
Yeah.
And one more related question, school staff or professionals in general that are working with the population that we're talking about, what kind of, training or preparation might you recommend for professionals? What do you wish people understood better, I guess?
Training is really good in all facets of life, but I also think that we also need to be very clear not to create or a situation in which someone now feels the need to respond or when it is not their role. I mean, I think a teacher is an incredible person. The teacher probably has better understanding and eyes on students than most. However, a teacher is not a therapist. And so sometimes overtraining is an issue. I think it goes back to what I said before. I think being clear with your expectations and your guidelines. So if your system is this and saying we're going to provide you training on crisis mental health or whatever, or identifying, suicidality or what have you, fabulous, because we need more eyes. Totally. But if you see that and you notice it, then what are the steps that you have to do? It's not your job to fix it. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
do your reports. I used to work, like I told you before, within the Child Advocacy Center. And one of the things that we did was to go to schools to speak about, you're a mandated reporter. What is your expectation in terms of reporting? And the expectation was always super very clear. You guys see more things than we do. However, your role is not to investigate. Your role is, it rises to a suspicion. So if you have a suspicion, definitely report it. And don't try to edit yourself, because you don't know whether there's been 3 other reports or not that then the hotline can put together. Do you know what I mean? But your role is your suspicion. You've gone your thing, but please don't do a full interview of a child in your classroom, because as much as you are trying to be helpful, it's not helpful to the kid in the long run.
Right.
So on the one hand, be informed, but on the other hand, don't do too much. Does that
Yeah,
make sense? In
absolutely.
terms of what I'm saying, like I want you to do, but I don't want you to do.
Yeah. No, it does truly make so much sense. It sounds like, the training that might be required is being trained on what your role is in various situations, and where your role ends and, who to bring,
Mhm.
challenges or issues to.
This slide highlights why training for school professionals is essential when working with immigrant students and families. First, staff need to understand that supporting immigrant students requires a broad, multifaceted role. One of the most basic but critical skills is facilitating communication. Training should prepare educators and social workers to use translation resources effectively and to recognize how language connects to culture, identity, and emotional expression. Without this, it's very difficult to build trust or provide meaningful support. Training should also emphasize how to create a welcoming and inclusive school environment. This includes culturally responsive practices, support for English language learners, and connecting families to resources. Just as important, staff must be trained to protect student privacy, especially avoiding questions about immigration status, so that schools remain safe places. Another key component of training is helping staff understand who to go to when issues arise. Not every educator is expected to handle every situation alone. Staff should know when to involve school social workers, counselors, administrators, or even external community or legal resources. Clear protocols and role clarity are essential so concerns are handled appropriately and effectively. Finally, training should prepare professionals to respond to the emotional needs of students, including trauma related to migration, and to understand their role in advocacy, working with community partners and supporting policies that protect immigrant students. Overall, training ensures that school staff are not just well intentioned, but also equipped with the knowledge and support systems needed to take the right actions.
Students. Do you have any kind of closing remarks? What do you want us to know? Like if we're bringing this to a legislator and we're going to speak to them, about policy or about changes that need to be made, what's a message that you might have for that person?
Sustainable changes or implementations of programs is important and should not be guided by the buzzword of the moment.
Mhm.
Like the work shouldn't shift from one thing to this just because there's money available because of that. Like there should be consistent, steady. Yes, you want to see that it is evidence based. You want to see that you're getting a good ROI. I just have a hard time with the fluctuations based on what funding is available, and the work still has to continue. And that I think prevention is always going to be the key, but prevention is not sexy, and prevention is not easily tracked in terms of, wow, this person got better or whatever, but that's okay because we don't want to have to go to a point where someone has to get better. Like I'd rather have steady, the tortoise and the hare type of work.
So what do you envision as kind of like a preventive intervention, for
Like
example?
when I used to live in Florida, there was just VPK, voluntary pre-K, like you just had it. It was there. It was part of legislation. So education, having that aspect, having that ability to provide some sort of care for a certain amount of time was great. I mean, that provides an opportunity for parents to be able to work if they need to. It also provides eyeballs, from someone outside of the family as to what's going on. I think early intervention services in terms of language and speech and whatever is important as well. That's where you'll also flush out whether there's any issues of other type of situations going on, developmental delays or what have you, and being able to provide the information so that parents aren't struggling with a child who maybe has behavioral issues due to the developmental delays and they have no idea about it. All of those sound great, but again, it becomes this issue of, well, why should I fund this or what, that type of thing. And it's not, I don't call education socialism, like, but I think that creating a situation where everybody has access to this, and this is beyond economic, like everybody has access to VPK, everybody has access to this, then you create an even playing field for everyone.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So your big recommendation, if you had the magic wand, would be more preventive uh
I
intervention.
would say preventive, especially like in big. Okay, so there's preventive in terms of education, but there's also preventive in terms of trauma. I mean, if we're talking about, the numbers, the population of girls who will be abused is incredible, and so to reduce that trauma from the very beginning would be helpful.
And I would also obviously be interested to dive a little deeper on our end into kind of the link between an immigrant experience and kind of some of this trauma and what kind of preventive work could be done specifically
I
for
think you
that.
have to define your immigrant experience based on reasoning and process and how they got here. I also think you need to define it based on recent immigration status and acculturation levels. My experience is going to be far different from someone who is just crossing the border,
Mhm.
right? So that doesn't mean that there wasn't an experience for me, but I also happen to speak English very well, and I also happen to have access to education. And so that is completely different than someone who comes in and doesn't speak any language, and doesn't speak any English. So it's a difficult task that you're trying to take on because you have to focus on one thing, right? Are we talking recent immigrants? Are we talking immigrants who crossed the border by land? Are we talking about immigrants who came and overstayed a visa? The experiences are totally different. There's oftentimes a lot of trauma over land crossings. And so that already creates an issue. And what trauma did they have prior to coming? What were the reasons for moving? So, parents have come in the 2000s. I would work with parents who would come to work and had left kids with grandparents and then had made enough money to bring the kid in, but now they don't know each other. that this kid grew up and now you have a teenager in your house that you didn't raise. And now this teenager's pissed off at you because they feel like you abandoned them. There is attachment issues, there is separation issues, there is potential, not potential like in a good way, but there's potential trauma that may have occurred having been left behind. There is potential trauma of the process to join. There is systemic family issues once you do rejoin.
And just the diversity of immigrant experience. Like we can't just say immigrant experience and then that covers everybody, obviously.
Right.
Um,
Immigrants are not a monolithic group. Immigration is highly diverse and complex. Oversimplifying immigrant experiences ignores the fluidity and socially constructed nature of their identities. Not all immigrants experience the same form of trauma. Some key factors include country of origin. Students may come from places with varying levels of political stability or economic opportunity. The reason for migration also matters, especially whether it was voluntary or forced, such as in the case of refugees or asylum seekers. Legal status can significantly impact a student's access to resources and their sense of safety. Similarly, differences in skills like language proficiency or prior education affect how students adjust academically. Socioeconomic background also plays a role, including the level of family support and access to resources. Another critical factor is exposure to trauma. It's important to recognize that trauma isn't always a single event. It's often the result of multiple layered stressors over time. These experiences can occur across different phases: before migration, during transit, and after arrival. Post-migration stressors are especially relevant in school settings and can include discrimination, language barriers, fear of deportation, and limited access to resources. Because of this, schools should adopt a trauma-informed lens. A trauma-informed approach means all staff are aware of how trauma impacts students and adjust their interactions accordingly, while trauma-informed care refers to more direct clinical support provided by trained professionals. The immigrant population is a stressed population, and as social workers, we should reduce those stresses. Overall, understanding this diversity helps school staff respond more effectively, with greater empathy and appropriate support.
And so overall, I think we've spoken about themes of multicultural staff being available to these students, and themes of mental health struggles and how they may be complicated by cultural factors or immigration status.
Mhm.
And this, and especially this last, what we just spoke on, in terms of what the role of the staff is in the school, to better help these students. Thank you so much for speaking with
You're
me.
you're welcome.
We so appreciate it, and your perspective is so valuable to us. So
I appreciate your time.
yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording.